I've been playing Kashtira since the deck came out many years ago. I've seen many topping lists. I have built many different variants. Kashtira has remained one of my favorite decks ever. I conceptually love it. I love the idea of how it plays. Sure, it's a bit overtuned, and we had some really bonker results, but it was a deck that came and went and felt like it had its own identity and was very strong even after its prime. And although the deck nowadays is not in the same glory and its age shows, many of the Kashtira cards are considered very strong and often unfair. We think of cards like Kashtira Fenrir, Unicorn, Shangri-Era, Birth, and even the Pressured Planet Wraithsoft. But among all the card pool for the few cards that Kashtira has, widely considered, and I mean, when I say this, I do not mean cards like Kashtira Extra or Kashtira Overlap, as those cards were never considered for proper play, as they were just more lore cards than anything else. And Overlap had the potential to be a really good one of, but it's just designed in a very awkward manner. The card that is often considered the worst addition to play in a competitive Kashtira deck, has always been Kashtira Ogre. And the consensus has always been Ogre is not a good card. For some, it's fine, but just not good enough. And for others, it just doesn't do anything. Going along the lines of saying that not only does the effect not do anything for cash, which in theory it doesn't, but its search targets are also not good. The two cards, of course, that Kashtira Ogre can search for is the often searched Kashtira Prep, which is really solid, but requires you to understand how to play Kashtira versus the generic way of going about it. And then, of course, you have the very underrated Kashtira Big Bang, which stopped being played when Arise Heart got banned because you would use this as a means to extend. But in all honesty, both Big Bang and Prep are actually solid. Big Bang, if not searched and set like a imperm, is a on-demand, evenly matched, which can win a game. And Preparations is both an extender, interruption, playthrough, and as a means to punish trap decks, which Kashtira struggles very badly against. But what about Ogre himself? Well, Ogre has the best individual stats for the cash cards, with a solid 2800 free body. It also has the ability to excavate 5 every single time, for the most part, and be able to banish one card face down and put the rest in the same order. Now, on paper, compared to something like Unicorn, which can rip from the extra, which is infinitely more valuable, and Fenrir being able to hit something on the ground, even with the Kashtira Rise Heart, which is both an extender and a way to get rid of more cards than Ogre, what is the line? Why would you play Ogre when you have Fenrir, which can search for Unicorn, or Scareclaw Cash, or even Tier Cash, which those two can be extenders in Unicorn. If you have Birth, you can normal it and go into Theosis and get another. Or, get Rise Heart, which can banish, which works with Birth immediately, and of course Unicorn, which is your best starter. So why would you play this deck and play Ogre? Ogre, which the two cards that you search off of it don't actually on demand right away give Cash that push. Because if there's one thing Cash struggles now, is just putting up a board because it's lost its two best cards. Well, that's where I think the secret power of Ogre comes in. And it's all relies fundamentally on understanding exactly what is the game plan for Kashtira. Kashtira's game plan is simple. It is, in fact, the very word that I just said, simplification. Everything about the Kashtira archetype is about simplifying the game state. It is about reducing the ceiling power of your opponent and taking away the opportunities for them to expand and to take over. You can look no further than Shangri-Era as the prime example, and the one that does all this heavy lifting. You're constantly taking away your zones. And then you pair this with the way that your cards work. You have Fenrir, which can hit cards on the field. You have Unicorn, which hits the extra deck. You have Birth, which punishes Grave. Riseheart, which hits the deck. And then you have Ogre, which also adds, but there's something extra good about Ogre. Ogre is a strong, solid body with 2,800 attack points. And Ogre is secretly great. It is not always the most consistent, but for example, during Ubel format, playing Kashtira Ogre in, say, decks that had specific one-ofs that they desperately needed the combo, the same theory with Kashtira Riceheart, and when I say this can go both ways, this in fact can go both ways. I am on the opinion that it matters. Being able to banish resources from your opponent's deck is super vital because if you get another turn with Kashtira, you often just win the game. As for Kashtira Riceheart, the argument always goes like this for people that don't see the power of the Banish 3 and see that as nothing more than a flare effect for Shangri. Basically, the philosophy for Riceheart and Ogre is that the banishing a face down for the deck does not matter. The same way that Pot of Desires banishing face down, where you wouldn't be able to actually access those cards, and you never were going to get those 10 cards to draw to. And while that works for some decks like Sword Soul, which historically has played stuff like Pot of Desires, there's other decks like I've aforementioned Ubel and even the limiting of Tempai, where you got rid of their field spell or you got rid of the specific one-ofs that a deck might need. That helps a lot too. But also, in my experience, the Riceheart Banish 3 face down has also often just won games because my opponent's like, well, you just got rid of it. I've had a game where I went against a branded player once and used Riceheart to banish. This was around the time that Branded Fusion had gone limited to 1. I banished the Branded Fusion face down, and they could not proceed to play the game. Now, of course, you can make the argument that that's not a great example, but it does just go to show, in theory, how strong an effect like that is. And Ogre being able to actually look at the 5 and choose the card, of course, you can mitigate what they are going to draw later on. But with Riceheart being able to get 3 is a very good option, even if we don't have number 89 Diablosis anymore. I still firmly believe in this philosophy that if done even once is good, but doing it multiple times does matter. It's the same logic with Runic and how, yes, Runic itself isn't really going to win by banishing your deck and milling, which, it can, but it's not what makes it good. But it's in the continuousness of being able to strip away resources and even the potential of your opponent being able to do something that I firmly believe is the huge strength, for Riceheart and Ogre. Mid-range deck. They act and play exactly like it, and they want to simplify that game state as much as possible. All your cards are aiming for that. I mean, a Riceheart himself was just another interaction that you could have on there. The banishing face down was to make up for the fact that even though Kashtira can technically hit in every area of the game, it doesn't do it on its own. It has to react. So it was very punishing to your opponent. But Ogre has good targets. In my opinion, you just need to know how preparations work, and you need to know how Big Bang works. In fact, I still think both those cards have more viability than the other 2 spell cards that I mentioned that are not named Theosis, Pressure Planet, or Birth. Big Bang is both an extension card and a very good desperate measure to set onto the field, and Preparations is a card that I feel is legitimately just not valued. If there's one thing your opponent's going to do, is they're always going to get rid of your Kashtira cards. Sim Prep can actually get it back. There's combos that you enable, and then stuff that you can do with it. Summoning cards out of the hand, being able to get even more disruption. And of course, if you're playing something like Macro, you can just summon Tier Cash, banish 3, you have all those options, and Ogre simply just enables you to see. Now, if you're doing your game plan ideally for Ogre, when you're playing it, your goal is to just remove the option for your opponent to draw into something good, which you want. You're going to get hand trapped, but your deck doesn't get punished terribly by hand traps, except by Perilia. Droll can hurt, but I mean, being able to rip cards with Unicorn and Ogre is good. I want to point something out. I think the power of Ogre and even Riceheart in this example come from the deceit of how it may not appear to be. Unicorn, for many, has immediate impact and is why so many people have wanted it banned for so long. Because it insulates and punishes badly in formats where you need every card in your extra deck. But I firmly believe the strength of Cash is in its ability to control the field and go for game in the next. And if you play in the grind, your cards are doing work. Playing multiple Rise Heart, banishing 3 every time is just reducing the chances that your opponent gets into something. Rise gets a generic 3, but Ogre gets to look at 5 and choose 1. And that's huge. Whether you're going to force your opponent to draw into a bad Perilia, or a bad Fualos, or bad Meowls after in a simplified game state where there's cards on the board, and you get rid of a top deck that could have been a 1-card starter, I think firmly Ogre has a place. Now, do I think Ogre will see continuous play for Cash? Well, that depends. A lot of lists nowadays don't even play Prep or Ogre. They play very simple down to the number. And on one hand, I understand it's not as. I love Rice Heart, but I do not think they are the powerhouses. I think that what will make this deck age well is Birth, Unicorn, and Scare Cash. I firmly believe every single one of these is what's going to keep the deck with the cards they have legal. Everything else will not age as well as you might think. Rise Heart will still be solid, but Ogre will fall to the wayside, but that doesn't mean it'll be bad. In fact, I could still see potential where this card gets played and still sees more stuff. Again, the strengths of this card is one, it's a very solid body. It's 2,800 and it takes resources away from your opponent. Now, with the new parallel teleport, it's actually not horrible either because you can, swing with Fenrir, tribute it, get this out, and get another banish and all that. And I want to point out too, as good as Fenrir is, it misses a lot. Your opponent's going to dodge. Ogre and Unicorn don't miss. And it guarantees if Shangri's on the field, it does its thing. And that's also important. Even though you're not zone locking anymore with Cash because it's just too slow and doesn't do its job there, I would like to point out that these effects do not miss. They have to be interrupted. There's never going to be a period where you're going to, unless they just don't have any cards, which is never going to happen, your opponent would have surrendered by them, where you're going to be sitting there and going, I missed and I wasted my effect. Fenrir will. Fenrir will do this a lot. Because your opponent are smart and they will dodge it like nothing else. But Ogre? No. Also, as an honorary, Kashtira Ogre is a monarch with the 2,800,000 stat, which I think is funny too. But actually, and a side note, he actually kind of fits thematically with what even Monarch does. Monarch and Cash are very similar in game style, believe it or not, even though you could argue Monarch is more of a mid-range stun. Kashtira is not that anymore anyways because the zone locking gimmick is just not there anymore. I do firmly believe that their game styles go for the same thing. You loop Erebus to hit cards in the hand, and for me, I play Thessalos, and you use it to reduce the options that your opponent has while using very strong spells and traps to prevent them from being able to get around it. The same way Birth interacts with the grave and Prep interacts with the hand, so you have those really strong options. And Ogre not only fits with tenacity of the Monarchs and other stuff, but it also fits very well with the game style. And there's one thing that it doesn't have, which is being able to manipulate the top cards of your deck, or at least your opponents. So, when you're playing your Monarch, you're looping your Erebus again and again. You have Ogre on the field. Not only is it punishing hand traps, but it's also just a strong enough body. It can be summoned off Ethier. So you have that. Ogre has that variance. And there was even a topping OCG list that displayed the power of Ogre. And, Cash doesn't do anything in the OCG. So the fact that this topping list for Monarch had Ogre in it randomly just go to show that even though it might not have a current place in modern Cash or even in 2025 as I'm making this, I still believe the potential of this card will still last. In fact, I say it's up there with something like Unicorn, with its strong stats, its potential, and the cards that it can search out. It's a very solid piece. I love Ogre. Like I said, I was playing this when Cash was at full power. I believed in Ogre. Ogre won me many games, having that extra name because you want to see Kashtira cards. When you play Kashtira, you want to be able to actually see all those strong cards. That's where the strength comes in. Those cards can carry and they can hold their own. They might lack a few interactions, but that's a whole other story. If you don't deal with a cash board, you lose the next turn. So I think Kashtira Ogre gets a really bad rap. I think for people that like it, don't give it enough credit. I've seen many great Kashtira duelists actually take it and say Ogre is secretly goated, which again, I firmly believe. I've won many games simply just, even if he's just another cash name, that's still important. All the Kashtira cards, again, minus the two other spells, which I don't believe are that good, they're just too hard to use, have their place and their power, and they're very present. I hope that Ogre still sees play, even after these aforementioned, Monarch topping and the fact that it fits very well with Cash. I know Fenrir will see play, Unicorn will see play, but I hope there's a world where Ogre will still see. And honestly, come another format with Yubel where you have just a deck needing specific one-ups, I think Ogre will still stick around. It's a nice prospect. It's nice to think about that. I did this video for just two reasons. One, I love Kashtira, and I want to do more videos where I'm just talking about my experiences with the game, my very limited experiences with this game, but also just kind of talk about maybe specific one-ups or decks that are not currently giving that attention. And for me, I've always just been rather disappointed with the community perception of Kashtira Ogre. Um, and hoped to give a new light to the deck and even just the card itself to see that maybe there is theory crafting behind it. Maybe the card is still worthwhile. Maybe I'm coping. There's always the chance of that, but I'll still put my faith in Ogre, at least for the time being. Unless we get new Kashtira cards, which I don't think will ever happen. I'm not gonna lie. See what happens, and yeah, that's all, really. Please let me know what you think in the comments section. Have a good one.